on Tesvav on the base, 15b, and we're about to get sidetracked now. So we're about two-thirds of the way down. The first word on the line is Zu Katani, and we're at the next third word on the line, Amar of Chizda. Together. Amar of Chizda, Giduz Chamisha. Okay, so yesterday we spoke about the idea of Rav Chizda that Rav Chizda had an interesting take on the Mishnah. Rav Chizda was sort of splitting the baby. What did he do? He said, if you have two people, let's say, Fanai Nachtaf. Sorry. You have one person, the Shliach, the messenger, says Fanai Nachtaf with Fanai Nachtam one signature. And then two witnesses testify about the other signature. Rav Chizda says that does not validate the divorce. Why? Because divorce needs to be validated either through regular kiyum shtaris, which involves two witnesses on both signatures, or with the rabbinical decree of b'fanei nachlav, which has to be said about the entire document. So now that we talk about Rav Chizda, we get to a complete sideshow. And that is as follows. Gidut chamisha mechitza chamisha. Aim at starfin at shia. Oikula mechitza, oikula begidut. Okay, what exactly is going on here? So I'm sure we're familiar that on Shabbos, generally speaking, there's a prohibition of haitzah. Haitzah is a very unique type of prohibition. You think about there are 39 prohibitions of Shabbos. 38 of them are productive enterprises. So what's productive? Lighting a fire, right? Mm-hmm. Planting a field, threshing a field, plowing, cooking. It's really baking. Threading a harness, weaving a cloth, etc. Cutting to an exact specification. These are all forms of productive enterprise. There's only one of them that isn't productive, and that is haitzah. What is haitzah? Strictly speaking, haitzah is transportation. It's moving. We call it, we call it carrying. Can't carry on Shabbos. What haitzah actually is transportation. Now, what's unique about haitzah is if you transport something 100 yards, okay, you have possibly violated a malacha and possibly not. The action is exactly identical. The only question is, what domain did it take place in? Right, so you do exactly the same action. You pick up something, walk 25 feet, and put it down. If it happens to be that you picked it up in a Rosh Hashanah, a private domain, and you put it down in a Rosh Hashanah, a public domain, you're chayav for haitzah, transportation. If, however, both of it was in a private domain, you're not chayav for haitzah. That's the malacha of haitzah. Included in the malacha of haitzah is also a concept called ma'avir. Ma'avir also loosely translates transportation, which is very simple. Ma'avir is if you carry something more than 6 feet in a public domain, you're also chayav for haitzah. So haitzah comprises either one of two components. Either you move something from one domain to the other domain, you transport it, or you transport something in the domain of the public domain more than 4 amas. We're on 15b, we just started 15b, and we're at about 2/3 of the way down. The first one line is Zukatani. Okay, now what's, it's just to make things, for the sake of brevity, how is a private domain designated? Typically, it's designated by having a wall in between it and a public domain. And one of the ways to differentiate things is if the wall is greater than 10 tefachim. 10 tefachim is approximately, what is it? It's
about 3 feet.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit less than 3 feet. a little bit less than 3 feet. Yeah, it would be about 30 inches. Is 10 tefachim. Maybe it's a little bit bigger. There's some bigger opinions. Now, so if you have a 30-inch fence that separates domains, here's the question: what happens if you have now the thing of the 30-inch fence? Truth is, it's not a 30-inch fence; it's a 30-inch difference in height. So how is that difference accomplished? Either, let's say, the Rosh Hashanah is elevated. Let's say, for example, you have an elevated road, right, with what do they call it? Underpinning on the side. So it's a steep rise to get to the roads. And that rise is more than 30 inches. And on the smaller side, maybe it's 40 inches on the bigger side. It's around that amount. So you have this road with the underpinning. Let's say it's 50 inches. That's a mechitza. That's a wall. The other side is considered now a private domain. What happens if the public can move in between? There's a lot of technicalities here I don't want to go through. Right. But generally speaking, the difference would be defined by a wall of 10, not a wall, but a difference in elevation of 10 tefachim. And like we said, difference in elevation could be either going up or going down. What happens if you have half and half? You have 5 tefachim difference in height. So, for example, let's say you have a what do they call it? A pothole, a large hole inside the public domain, and it's 5 tefachim deep. So it's, let's say, 15 inches. And a guy takes, like they have these construction workers, they have like these little fences they put up around these holes. So he puts up a fence that's 5 tefachim tall. So the total difference is 5 tefachim below, 5 tefachim above. Net, you have 10 tefachim difference. Does that define a reshus hayachid or not? Yeah, you hear the question?
Yeah, yes.
So the Gemara says, Gidin chamisha mechitz chamisha emet starfin at yehei oikula mechitza oikula begidut. Rav Chizah says that such a thing does not define a reshus hayachid unless it's either 10 tefachim as a fence or 10 tefachim in depth. However, Dorish Meremer disagreed, and he said, "Kiddush chamisha mechitza chamisha." If you have 5 in depth and 5 in height, mitzdarfin, it could combine. The hilchasa and the halacha is that mitzdarfin, it does combine. Now, once we're on the subject of splitting the babies, let's continue. We have a story of Ilfa. Who's Ilfa? Anyone remembers who Ilfa was?
Disney movie picture.
Ilfa was a very unique character. Ilfa was a contemporary of Rabbi Yehudah. He was at the same spiritual level of Rabbi Yehudah. However, he ended up going into business. There's a whole story. We saw the story. I think it was back in Katan. Why they were walking together. They both were on their way to go into business, and Rabbi Yehudah heard an angel threatening to kill him if he goes into business. So Rabbi Yehudah went back to study. Ilfa went to business. He was very successful. He came back. He saw Rabbi Yehudah in Rosh Hashiva. He's the leader of the congregation, the leader of the study hall. So he was a bit jealous. So he did was he went on a big ship. He grabbed onto the mast and he said he'd jump off if anyone can ask him a question that he can't answer. And sure enough, there were a few attempts, and sure enough, he answered. Okay, anyway, famous Ilfa. So at this point, apparently Ilfa had a question, but Ilfa was not hanging from the ship mast, threatening to jump off. Okay, what did Ilfa say? Boy, this is Ilfa's question. Yidayim tahiris lachatzam, I aim tahiris lachatzam. So we in order to eat bread, you have to wash your hands twice, right? Twice in each hand. It's called natilas yidayim. What happens if he washes hands halfway? Does it work or not? Well, you're probably wondering, what does halfway mean? What exactly did he do half? Did he wash them 1 time instead of 2 times? Did he wash half of his hands? Did it have?
I was losing sleep on this just the other night. I'm glad.
Oh, perfect. Eric said he was losing sleep on this question. So the Gemara says, "Hey chidami, what does half mean? Ilema de kamashi betray tremer revius. So in other words, what he was using is he was washing both of his hands, each hand with half a revius. So the minimum quantity is a revius, it's 5 ounces, 3 to 5 ounces, 3.5 to 5 ounces. So he's washing his hands with a half revius. And now the question, what's the question? The question is, do you fulfill your obligation washing your hands, each hand with half revius? The Gemara says, "V'hatanan." The Bryce says, "Miravius neitly dayam la'echad afilu shnayim." If you have a full revius, you could wash one person's hand and even two people's hands. I.e., the revius requirement is not to wash your hands; it's to begin washing your hands with. You need to start with a revius, but when you're finishing, you can finish with even less than a revius. Okay. So therefore, washing each hand with half a revius certainly is kosher. He washed each hand one at a time. So Gemara says that this also works. What happened? So there's two ways to kosherize your hands, and occasionally I've had to rely on this. So what do? Typically we go to the sink, we pour water over each of our hands twice. What happens if you don't have water? And let's say you're next to a river or a stream. So if the river and the stream is kosher as a mikvah, it holds 1 cubic meter of water. It's about 400 gallons. So then you can dip your hand into the water, and that works as well. So I was hiking once, I had to wash my hands because I didn't have any water, but there was a spring there. Yeah. There's a spring with plenty of water. So I dipped my hands in, and that was sufficient. And the halacha is what? So you're washing each of your hands using a different method. The halacha is tahara, it works, your hands are tahara. Okay, so that's not the question. The el the kamashi palga the yoni. What did he do? So you have to wash your hands until the parak. What is the parak? So if you're watching me on the screen, you can see the parak is it's machlokes. Some opinions say the parak is the wrist. Other opinions say it's the knuckle. La halacha, it's the knuckle. That's why on Tisha B'Av and in Kippur, when we wash our hands in the morning, we wash until the knuckles, basically, not the other side of the hand. Now, what happens if somebody decides to wash this part of his hands, and then he dries it, and then he washes the other part of his hands? So he's splitting the area between the distally from the end of the hand, proximally toward the knuckle. The water doesn't run. Yeah, and he's very careful to make sure the water doesn't run. Remember, he can use as little water as he wants, as long as he starts with a revius. So he drizzles some water over his hands, he dries it, and then he drizzles over the remaining area of his hands. That's what he did. Does that work? That was the question of Ilfa. So the Gemara says, Amr to Rav Yana already answered the question. It doesn't work. Okay, so what was Ilfa's question? What happened was as follows. Instead of drying his hands, he kept his hands wet. So he poured water over each of his hands twice, over half of each of his hands. In other words, half of the area until the parak. It'd be half the area between the end of the hands and the knuckles. And so he washes half the area twice, and then he goes back and washes the other half twice, and the hands are still wet. It's mashka tefech. Okay, so what's sort of the logical reasoning here? The reasoning is, look, his hands are still wet. His hands are still wet, so we should view it as still in the process of being washed. It should be one long washing, meaning that the water of tefech, the little bit of moisture that's on his hands, is able to connect the hand, and we look at it as one washing. So Gemara says, okay, so you're making a presumption here that mashk tefech, a moist hand, is sufficient. We recognize it enough that we consider it significant, but actually we don't. But we learned. So we have 3 scenarios where somebody has a tahar liquid, let's say it's orange juice, and he's pouring it into a non-tahor vessel. Okay, so what does he do? There's, let's say, 3 different ways to do this. So one way is called nitzik. Nitzik is you take the orange juice and you pour it from a tahor cup to a non-tahor cup. You pour it in. Now over here we have a connection between the tahor vessel and the non-tahor vessel. It's the flow. That's called nitzik. Another option, let's say, is where you use a funnel, right? And we'll say that he used a funnel. A funnel is called katafras. Now, another way to do a funnel is you have like a slanty piece of metal. You put it on one cup, pour it over, and then that's also an example of katafras. It's being poured over a slanty area. So nitzik is direct chibur, it's top to bottom. Katafras is sort of slanty. It goes across another item first. It's called katafras. What happens if you have 2 doughs? One dough is tahor, the other dough is tameh. However, the tahor dough is moist, and that moisture is touching the tameh dough. That's called mashkatafach. Does that connect them or not? All these 3 things, the Mishnah says, ein chibur. It's not a connection. Loyla tuma. The 3 examples I gave you were examples of tuma, but similarly for loyla tahara. Let's say, for example, you have a mikveh. You have 2 bodies of water. You have on the side of a mountain, you have one of them that has 20 sa and the other one that has 40 sa. And then it rains, like in the Columbia Gorge, and there's a stream. The stream now connects both mikvahs, but the stream is running on a slanty mountaintop. It's called katafras, and it's ein chibur. It does not validate both mikvahs. The mikvah that's less than the required quantity is not kosher. Okay, being that mashkatafach is not a connection.
We're talking this slope hill, right?
Correct.
So when you're pouring something into one vessel and another vessel,
Also not a chibur. Also not a connection. Nitzik katafras and mashkatafach are not chibur.
Okay.
This is very thick.
I'm sorry.
Very thick.
You gotta be super, super thick. Like maybe Gemara said, if you remember the Gemara, we said that there's certain type of honey that's so thick that when you pour it, the little string, it pulls everything back up.
That's right. We talked about it.
Yeah, that was the type of dvash of I can't remember some city. Yeah, our regular honey, especially the refined honey that we typically consume, is nowhere close to being as thick because typically the string goes the other direction. The string falls down instead of going up. Okay. Okay, so Gemara says, okay, the question is there's 2 types of ways to describe moisture. One type is a moisture that your hands are moist. The other type is your hands are so wet, they actually cause other things to become wet. And this, you can sort of see this, you wash your hands are extremely wet. And then if you shake it off and wait 35 seconds, you won't be able to get a towel like stained with water. It's moist, but the water won't transfer over to something else. So tefech is enough to get something else moist. Okay, so Gemara says, hold on. We know that. That if your hands are so moist, they'll get something else wet. That is a connection. So again, what is the question of ilfa? So Gemara says, okay, this is actually the question of ilfa. Tefech la tefech. The hands are very moist. In other words, he washed half of his hands, literally the area, let's say between the joints and the fingers, the first set of joints, and then he washed the rest of his hands. And the first part of his hands are still sufficiently moist to tefech la tefech, to get other things wet. And the question is, is that sufficient for netilas yadayim or not? Now, what about the fact that Mishnah says that tefech la tefech is considered connecting? Gemara says it could be it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. And the question here is with regard to the rabbi's opinion about netilas yadayim. What's Rabbi Yehudah's opinion? It's time we learned. Mikvah sheyesh b'arba'am sa, a mikvah that has 40 sa. Okay, so yes, I just told you before that 40 saw is 1 cubic meter, which is 1,000 liters, about 370 something gallons, 376 gallons, I think it is. Now that is a chumrah. The actual amount of the actual minimum quantity of a mikvah, even though we will not build a mikvah less than 1 cubic meter, I'm sorry. Cubic liter is a lot less. There's no liter, yeah. Cubic liter is technically not a cubic measurement. It itself is volumetric. Anyway, although technically speaking, we will never build a mikvah less than 1 cubic meter, 1,000 liters, 376 gallons. However, practically speaking, the minimum quantity, if you had to be really strict about it, it's much closer to about half that. So it's around 400 liters, something in that range. It could be, you figure about 100 and something gallons, 150 gallons or so. Okay, so let's say somebody has a minimum quantity mikvah, an absolute minimum, 400 liters, maybe it's 600 liters, depends on how you quantify these things. Okay, so he has a minimum quantity mikvah, exactly. The yardu shnayim v'tovlu, shnayim b'vasachas, and 2 people use the mikvah at the same time, then they're taharim, then they're tahar. However, if they use the water one after another, rishon tahar v'hasheni tamei. The first guy is tahar, the second guy is tamei. Why is this? Because the first guy removes some water with him when he comes out of the mikvah, because he's wet. He's pulling water out of the mikvah. Now the mikvah is less than the minimum quantity. However, Yehudah has an interesting observation. Yehudah says that the first guy, he's out of the water. And his head's out of the water. According to the rabbi's opinion, as soon as the guy's head's out of the water, as soon as the first guy's head is out of the water, the second guy does not fulfill the requirement of mikvah, because the water on his hair is out. However, according to Rabbi Yehudah's opinion, if the guy is basically out of the mikvah, he's just standing, his toes are in the mikvah. Okay, but everything else is out. It's still kosher for the second guy to be in the mikvah. Why is this? He has a unique concept where he sees the water on the person that's on top of the mikvah as if it's in the mikvah. As if the person steps outside the mikvah, it doesn't work anymore. But if he's still in the water, even if he's still in the space of the mikvah, even if he himself is out of the water, then it's kosher. So that might be why Rabbi Yehudah says that the feich is considered a chibur, because it's sufficiently wet to make other things wet, and that's why it could be connected. But it could be the rabbis. The question is whether the rabbis would agree with that concept with regard to Netilas Yadayim. Okay. Amar of Yirmiyah. Rav Yirmiyah, remember, he's the one who's famously noted throughout Shas for splitting the baby and for asking questions that are sort of borderline, questions. So here it goes. Hari Amru, we learned Habar Roishiv Ruben Mayim Shuvin. Okay, so if you remember in the mission Shabbos, the end of the I think it's the end of the first paragraph. I think it's in Daf Yomi, maybe I think it's Daf Yomi. You learn about the 18 Gzeros of Hillel. There were 18 different decrees that were made to if you don't remember it, you can remind yourself it's probably the second most difficult sugya in Shas, after Chinas Kanagahanam, which is another similar subject in Pesachim. Okay. The Yurches Gzeros, one of those Yurches Gzeros are as follows. If you have a person, I'm not going to go through the reasons behind these Gzeros, but let's say to go to a mikvah, you go to water that has never been in a vessel. Water that's been in a vessel, it's been in a cup, let's say, we call that Mayim Shuvim. So you have a story as follows. If you have somebody who went into a mikvah, but the mikvah, instead of being filled with rainwater or spring water, was filled with mayim she'uvin. It was filled with sink water, tap water.
Sink water?
Tap water. Or it was filled by any other vessel. So it was gathered in rain buckets and it was poured in. Okay. Or you have a guy who comes out of a mikvah and he pours over his head three measurements. Shlosh lugan mayim shuvin. He pours over his head 3 lugan, small amount, a couple of liters of tap water. The halacha is tamei. He becomes tamei. Why is he tamei? Because it's a little bit of a separate discussion, but basically the idea was they didn't want people to get confused. In other words, what was happening was the mikvahs were very dirty, and after the mikvah they'd go into a clean water pool or they'd take a shower. And the rabbis got concerned.
Disgusting.
The rabbis got concerned that people would think that the mikvah is not the part that's making you tar, it's the shower or the clean bath that's making you tar. So he said anyone who takes a clean bath after a required immersion becomes tamei.
Oh.
And not only that, in general, anyone who's going to go into if you have a regular tahor person who goes into a swimming pool, he also becomes tamei. Okay, and this is to understand the distinction between a mikvah and a swimming pool or a shower. Okay, now here's the question. Here's the question. In other words, so he had a mikvah that was filled with tap water. He walked into the mikvah, but his upper torso was outside of the water. Okay, then he took half the measurements. Instead of taking 3 lugin, he took 1.5 lugin and he poured it over his head. Does it become tamei or not? So, in order to become tamei from a swimming pool, you have to be completely in the swimming pool. You have to submerge yourself. In order to become tamei from the shower, then the shower water has to go over your whole body. Over here, half the shower water is going on his body, and the other half of his body is in a swimming pool. So does it become tamei or not? So Gemara says, take him. Let it stand. It's unresolved. Okay, Rapapa joined in the fray, and he said as follows: we learned, Balkari Kollel shenosnu olav tisha kabin mayim tohor. It's an idea of a Balkari becoming tohor. It's a very noble practice. It's practiced across many different communities, mostly in secret. But anyone who has a seminal emission goes to the mikveh afterwards. And there are 2 ways to become tahor from tumas keri. One of them is ideally you go to a mikveh, and the second to ideal is you pour over your head 9 lugin. 9 lugin, I think, is 4.5 gallons at a maximum. There are smaller shiurim as well. Now, okay, could it be done? Is a shower, in other words, if there's a certain way to do this, you have to stand underneath the water. It has to go on top of your head, and your hands should be loosely held on your chest. Okay, you can look at certain pay. I think it's Peiches or Peites and Shulchan Aruch and Chaim if you want to see more details about how to do it. Anyway, does a regular shower work? That's a big debate between the Chassidish Paiskim and the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish says that each nozzle of the shower head is considered its own shower. So you need from a single shower nozzle 4.5 gallons. So according to the Chazon Ish, some people who the only way they can do this is by taking a shower. They use to actually remove the nozzle from the shower, so they have only one hole, and they pour.
Is that why in Israel, in some of the places, you have these pipes that just?
I don't know.
In the men's mikveh, you have this one.
I have no clue, but that would suffice according to Chazon Ish. According to Chassidish Paiskim, there's no such thing. A shower with multiple nozzles you all measure it at once. It's 4.5 gallons. Okay. In other words, the 2 methods are, one is called tisha kabin. That's you pour over yourself, 4 or 5 gallons of water. And some people, by the way, and this is a particular Chabad Hasidim tend to be very strict about this. If they don't have a mikveh nearby, they do this in private. And they'll do is they'll fill up 3 buckets, each one about 1.5 gallons, and they'll pour it over themselves one after another. Or you can have somebody pour it over you. Okay, anyway, just give me a second. Now, what happens if you have the same story here? The guy is halfway in the mikvah, so his upper torso is outside the mikvah, and he pours over himself 9 buckets of 9 kabin, so it's 4 gallons of water. Does that make him Torah from tumas keri or not? Take it, we'll let it stand. It remains unresolved. Okay. Now we have an interesting debate here. So you have a document. One person says document was I saw the document being written. The other guy says I saw the document being signed. Okay, it doesn't work. Now we have very fundamental debate here. Amar Shmuel bar Yehudah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo yishanu, this is only true. Ela she'ein haget yotzim mitachas yedei shneim. What does this mean? Now, there's two ways to send a divorce. Well, there are many ways, but one of the ways to do it is to send it with a messenger, and another way to do it is to send it with two messengers. Says Shmuel, if both of this scenario where one guy says b'fanei nechtav, the other guy says b'fanei nechtav, it doesn't work, it's invalid. That's only where there's a single messenger. But if there are two messengers, it's kosher. Kosher. Then the document would be kosher. Alma kasavar, evidently he holds. Shnayim sheviu get me medinas hayam ain't tzrichen shiyam fnei nechtav fnei nechtam. If you have two people who bring a divorce, they do not need to say b'fanei nechtam. Why not? Because they're available to verify the document. Abayas says, Elamayat, if that's the case, say for diktoni shnayim b'fanei nechtav ve'echad b'fanei nechtam. Also, you have so in other words, the first scenario of the Mishnah is talking about a single messenger, and that's why it's invalid. So now we move to the end of the Mishnah. What are we talking about? Also single messenger. We're also talking about one messenger. And what do we learn? Two people say, we saw it being written. One person says, I saw it being signed. Apostle, it's not kosher. For Yehudah says it's kosher. The reason is because there aren't two messengers, there's only one messenger. But if there were two messengers, so two people here are saying b'fanei nechtav, the two messengers, and one guy is saying b'fanei nechtav, then it's kosher. He says to him, correct, that is true. So he says to him, okay, so if the divorce is not, is only one messenger. So what's the debate between Rabbi Yehudah and the Rabbanan? Gemara says this is the debate. Mar Sover, one says, Desrina Dilma Asi Lechlufe Bekim Shtaras Dalma. One opinion is that we're concerned maybe it will be confused with the verification of a document of okay, so in other words, we're talking about one messenger. And what's the concern here? Because two people are saying b'fanei nechtav, we're concerned people will confuse it with kiyum shtaros. Because over here, only one person saying he saw the signatures. So therefore, people are confused with kiyum shtaros, and therefore it's invalid. In other words, either do b'fanei nechtav or do kiyum shtaros, do not mix and match. And the other rabbi, Rabbi Yehudah says, Amar Sofer like Gazrinan, we're not concerned. It doesn't look like kiyum shtaros because there's only one person saying b'fanei nechtam, and therefore, because it's not concerned, because people will make the confusion, therefore the document is kosher.
Kiyum shtaros.
Verification of signatures. Typical verification requires two witnesses on either signature. And it's a methodology of preventing forgery. The simple idea is that two people verify the signatures, and then a court signs off on it. Now, the court signatures are infinitely greater, more easily verifiable.
Mm-hmm.
So when you bring a verified document to verify it, should take a minute.
Okay.
Lishnach, another version. Amrilo, they say as follows: Amar Shmuel bar Yehudah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehudah says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, "I will get yotzim tachas yedei shneim apostle." According to this version, Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehudah, we'll see in another minute. Even if the divorce is carried by two messengers, the document is invalid. It's not kosher. Alma kasavar shnayim shaviu get medinas hayam tzrichen shem fnei nechtam fnei nechtam. First part of the Mishnah is even in a scenario of two witnesses, and even of two messengers. And despite the fact that there's two messengers, they both need to say b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam. If only one does, it's not kosher. It's the opposite of the first opinion. Abayas says, Elamayat, if this is the case, say for the Tani Shnayim, I'm b'fanei nechtam, echad I'm b'fanei nechtam, Apostle, Rabbi Yehudah Machshar. 1 second. So let's look at the Seifa, the end of the Mishnah. Two people say b'fanei nechtam, one says b'fanei nechtam, it's not kosher. Rabbi Yehudah says it is kosher. I feel get yotzim tachas deishaim pas the rabbanon. Even if the divorce is being carried by two messengers, it's invalid. The rabbis say it's invalid. Amalei says incorrect. What's the debate? Okay, 1 second. So again, the rabbi's opinion is if you have two messengers, again, according to this second version, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehudah says if you have two messengers, one messenger says b'fanei nechtav, the other one says b'fanei nechtam, it is not kosher. Opposite of the first version, because you need both of them to say both things. There's a debate between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehudah if one of them said b'fanei nechtam, but two of them said b'fanei nechtav. We saw two people say they saw it being written. One guy says he saw it being signed. Rabbi Yehudah says it's kosher. The rabbis say it's possible. What's the debate between the Rabbi Yehudah and the rabbis about? Gemara has a simple solution. The rabbis say that they're not familiar with the laws of Lishma. Therefore, if you have two messengers, both of them need to testify about Lishma. And until they do so, it's invalid. And Rabbi Yehudah says, because their witnesses are not available to verify, and therefore, if you have two witnesses on the writing and one witness on the signature, that's acceptable as well. So the Gemara says, that's the case. And the debate between Rav and Rava seems to be machlokes between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehudah. So the Gemara says, not necessarily. Rava would say that the actual debate between Rabbi Yehudah and the Rabbanan is like the first version of the Gemara. The question is whether witnesses are available to verify documents and whether it will confuse verification of signatures with a scenario where two people testify about the writing, but one person testifies about the document. So Rava will just reject this whole second version of the Gemara, and the first version of the Gemara works entirely well according to Rava. But it's all about kiyum shtaros. Rava would say to you, Kula alma be'inan l'shma. Everyone holds the document needs to be written l'shma. And what are we talking about here? So recall that according to Rabbah, everyone learned the laws of Lishma. However, the rabbis still kept the decree because they were concerned people would forget it again. Now, is this decree extend to where two people are messengers or only where one person's a messenger? The Maratzav Gazrinan, Maratzav Loy Gazrinan. The rabbis say that the decree is in effect whether it's for one messenger or two messengers. And Rabbi Yehudah says the decree is only in effect for one messenger. When you do two messengers, there's no requirement to say b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. So Mar says, okay, if that's the case, then v'liflig nami Rabbi Yehudah b'reisha. So Rabbi Yehudah should disagree in the beginning of the mission as well. Two witnesses, one says b'fanei nechtam, one says b'fanei nechtam. They're both messengers. And we just said, according to Rabbi Yehudah, they're both messengers. Even according to Rabbah, there's no requirement to say b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. So why doesn't Rabbi Yehudah disagree there as well? So the Gemara says, you're right. We learned, Rabbi Yehudah disagreed also in the beginning of the Mishnah. Okay, I think tomorrow we'll have to review this anyway. It's not there.